In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. We got some drama in Grizzlies land, Chris. There is drama in Grizzlies land. The Grizzlies fall by 37 points in what was probably the worst performance of the season on Monday in New York. Obviously, there was some negativity floating, as to be expected after a loss like that. I do want to get into it with you, talk about some of my concerns and worries. But I think one of the big topics yesterday was guys jumping off of social media. You know, you had Ja Morant deactivate his Twitter account, Jake LaRavia deactivate his Twitter account, and there's a lot of discussion around.
I would like to deactivate my Twitter account, frankly.
I know. We all might be better for it.
Right.
If we all just stayed off of social media a little bit more. But unfortunately, there's a lot of readers on social media, so I feel the obligation to still be on there quite a bit. But obviously not a good game for the Grizzlies. Nothing went well. I think that this was, we talk about the 3 Ps in the new offense with trademark, as Chris says.
Yeah.
This was the worst 3 Ps game I've ever seen. I mean, the possessions, you had the Knicks shoot 108 shots, the pace, the Knicks just raced up and down the floor past Memphis the whole game. I think they had 31 transition points or something like that. And then the principles, bad. I mean, who knows exactly, but bad, because they turned the ball over 26 times, and that continues to be a bad trend. So really terrible performance by the Grizzlies. You know, chance to bounce back, 1 game in a long season, but a game that moves the worry meter slightly for me. How about you?
Yeah, I'm still not sure what the principles are, to be honest with you. I think, it's the worst game they played this season. And you're always going to have a game that's your worst game. Like, it's going to happen, right? And so having a game, and it's probably going to be on the road against a good team. That's the place where the Grizzlies were supposed to lose that game, by the way. I think the reason that game hit so hard for a lot of fans, and I'm guessing for some players too, that's just a guess, but I'm guessing, is that, you lost a game on the road against a good team after a 6-game winning streak. It shouldn't be a big deal. But I think it's a bigger deal because of not only the magnitude of the loss, but because it took a highlight and underlined some concerns that people already had before the game, even amid the really good play. One of those is the persistence of turnovers. It just won't go away. It's this problem that's plagued them all season. As good as they've been on offense, that's been despite of this drag of turnovers. It's been a problem all season. That was their worst turnover game of the season. It's this sense that the team is not as good. It's not just that they're not as good against the good teams, because frankly, I think everyone's not as good against the good teams, right? It's that there's a real gap between the Grizzlies against bad teams and middle of the pack teams, and then versus against the higher echelon teams. That there's a gap there that they haven't really closed despite their record this season. And then the third thing that is, maybe a little bit more recent or a little bit less precise is that there's a general sense that Morant hasn't been at his best really lately. And that was one of his worst. He was negative 41 on the game. That was one of his worst games this season. And so I think before that game tipped, fans were concerned about those 3 things. And then that game sort of fed into those 3 concerns that already existed. And I think that's a lot of it. But to me, it's not some declarative statement on what the Grizzlies are, but it does sort of raise the stakes a little bit for the game we're about to go to, Thursday night against the Rockets, where you've lost 3 in a row to them. That team is winning games against good teams. And the Grizzlies already sort of had that game circled, I think. There's a real thing between the Grizzlies and Rockets. And now it's at home. It's on national TV. You got 2 days rest. You're coming off this butt kicking you just took in New York. Like it's a really interesting game now coming up.
It is. Couple things on this. One, to go back to your point, not as good against the best teams makes sense, of course.
Right.
But when you are 1-5 against those teams, they're 0-4 against the West, the top 2 teams in the West. They beat the Celtics, and they obviously just lost to the Knicks. When it's that bad, when it's one win in terms of differential there, I think that is a little bit more alarming. And like if you go back through the games in which the Grizzlies just got blown out, the first one was without Jaren. That was in Houston. That was the second game of the season. The next one was without Ja and a whole cast of characters against Oklahoma City. And then there was this one where most of the team was available outside of Vince and Marcus. And that one to me, because of that reason, was a little bit more alarming.
No.
If you go down a little bit, and I wrote about this in the newsletter, like if you include 4th place teams and look at the total record, they went 1-1 against Denver. Denver didn't have Nikola Jokic. They beat Milwaukee in one of the best wins of the season, I think, at this point. But they weren't whole either. Milwaukee wasn't whole in that game either. So the excuse is cut on both sides here. Players not being available. That's something that's discussed often, but those excuses weren't there against New York. And so for me, it was a little bit more worrisome the way that game went.
To your point, you're coming off a 6-game win streak and you have your guys and you have some rest. Like you should have been set up for a good performance in that moment. You can sort of slice this different ways. I mean, the way I sliced it, and this is as of yesterday, so I don't know whether we're recording on Wednesday. So this is as of Tuesday. Some of these things change day to day. But as of Tuesday, if you look at the way the NBA is set up now, you have playoff teams, play-in teams, and lottery teams, right? It's sort of triaged in the standings. And so in terms of the way the standings were yesterday, the Grizzlies on the season were 17-4 against the teams that are currently the lottery teams. But they're 9-3 against the teams that are currently the play-in teams. Like those are playoff teams that are in the postseason mix. And then 5-9 against the playoff teams. And so, the 0-3, and the other part of that is they were 5-3 against those teams the day they beat Boston a month and a half ago. 0-6 since. And so since that win at Boston, they've lost twice to the Rockets. They got blown out at OKC. They got blown out at New York. They lost to the Clippers. They lost to the Lakers. So that's 6 in a row among teams currently above the play-in line. That's 6 straight losses to those teams. And so I think you're sort of waiting for a corner to get turned, and it hasn't quite happened. And so that's, again, the Houston game coming up. There's no must-win game in the regular season, but it's a game that, it was already high in, the consciousness of, what this will represent for the team, and it's even higher now after that Knicks game.
I was asked on Jason and John's show last week on Thursday, so obviously this is before the Grizzlies got blown out, about that particular game against the Rockets coming up and, if it could be a must win or whatever that might mean at this point in the season. And I was like, it's only one game. The tiebreaker's already decided. Houston's got it. If you want to stay afloat in the standings and have a chance to finish in second, that's one that you want to get. But it doesn't feel like you absolutely have to get it under any circumstances. My tone has changed quite a bit after that New York performance because it just you can't expect anything but discontent when you play that badly, and it's going to get louder and noisier if you follow up your worst performance of the season with another agonizing loss to Houston. And so I think it does sort of change the tempo of this game.
I think people if they lose that game, and they could very easily lose that game because all Houston does is win. All Houston does, by the way, is win close games. Just a little aside, I was looking at Houston's schedule. So they come in on a 4-game winning streak. At Atlanta,
rolling.
But at Atlanta, 4-point win. At Boston, 2-point win. At Cleveland, 4-point win. Home against Cleveland, 1-point win. They're not running off on teams, but they're in the mix and they're pulling out these close games. And that's kind of impressive, right? I think people would be upset if the Grizzlies lose the game. But what I'm really looking for first is being in the game, right? It's very important that you get a good effort. You can't have a game like that Knicks game or like that OKC game. I think that would really set off alarms. If you get into a close game and Houston pulls it out, like that's going to feel really bad for the players and the fans, but it would be a different category than what just happened against the Knicks.
Yeah, psychologically it has a little bit of meaning, I think. And it did before, and maybe I was wrong to downplay it at first, but it does, especially now, I think, after the New York loss. And in Houston's defense, like they controlled those games against Cleveland. They the final scores were close, but they controlled them like most of the way. And so I think that, they are playing as good as any team has played this season. Those are some really impressive wins that they've strung together. And so to the timing of being able to beat Houston, if Memphis is able to do it, could not be any more perfect, I think, coming off of that loss and given what the Rockets have done recently. And so it is definitely going to be a very big game. It's also going to be interesting to see what they do. Like, I think when you watch that game against New York, there were obviously several problems, right? Like, turn the ball over 26 times. You compound that by giving up a ton of offensive rebounds and, second chance points, and all of a sudden that's how you end up in a huge hole. But the turnovers have been a problem all season. And the Grizzlies are really the only team that's competitive besides the Clippers in the bottom 10 of the league in terms of turnovers per game. Like your company that you hold with all these turnovers are teams that are very bad.
I think the turnovers are a big problem with the Grizzlies. All per game stats, the Grizzlies have the fastest pace in the league, which means more possessions, which means more of everything. They are actually not the worst turnover team in the league. They're 26, which is bad. There are 4 teams that are worse than the Grizzlies when you look at it as a rate basis, possession basis. So the per game stuff, I think, distorts a little bit, but it's obviously a big problem. The only other of the bottom 10 turnover rate teams, the Clippers are down there and the Wolves are down there, but it's mostly bad teams. So it's a big problem. It's the kind of thing, though, the Grizzlies' offense has been good even with the turnovers, right? And so it's this thing of, can you clean it up? To me, it's more of an issue of, does it get worse? Like with everything else, does it get worse against better teams? Is it more crippling against better teams? And that Knicks game was the worst turnover game of the season from a raw number standpoint. I think 2 of the other 3 worst games are 2 of the Houston games. And to me, I think about what do the Knicks and the Rockets have in common other than just being really good. The Knicks at forward start Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby and Josh Hart, depending on how you want to define positions, but long, active, aggressive defenders who are going to wreak havoc in a passing lane or on the point of attack defense. And the Rockets have Dylan Brooks and Amen Thompson. It's kind of the same kind of thing. In fact, that level of sort of rangy, active perimeter defense, I think that playing those kind of teams, the Clippers with Derrick Jones, those kind of teams, I think, exacerbates a problem that's already there for the Grizzlies. And passes you can make, drives you can make when you're playing the Hornets and Jazz, maybe it doesn't come as easy when you're playing the Rockets and the Knicks.
Yeah, well, that was quite the step up in class to go from the Utah game. I can see there being a little bit of a stun factor when you make those changes. And to your point on the per game stuff, I do think that's right, obviously, but another part of this is how many points you're giving up based on your mistake. Your mistakes are worse when they are directly resulting in easy buckets for the other team.
Not all turnovers are equal, right?
Right. And that's been a problem. That the Grizzlies are giving up a lot of opponent points off of turnovers because they turn the ball over more. But the possessions game within the game also matters. If the Grizzlies turn the ball over 20 times, but they force a lot of turnovers and they grab a lot of offensive rebounds, there's a way to counterbalance that. But there also becomes a point where the volume of the turnovers is just too high, and that's where we are, right? Yeah. That's where it stands now. And so the per game, you're right, it doesn't matter quite as much, but it does the Knicks took 108 shots. How do you expect to ever win a basketball game with the other team attempting 108 shots?
Well, if you get 115.
Right. But that's never going to happen, right? The volume is too high in that sense. And that's been a problem all season. And I don't know if there's a direct fix to it besides maybe toning down the pace or trying something.
Well, to me, there's a real question. I tried to write about this a few weeks ago in sort of a wonkier piece, but they're different because to the point we've been talking about, there are different kinds of turnovers. Not all turnovers happen differently, right? If you commit a charge, that's a turnover, but the other team's taking the ball out of bounds and they're not getting the ball running out for a layup, right? So there are different kinds of turnovers. And I asked Taylor Jenkins about this a few weeks ago, and I included the quote in this column I wrote. But does the team think about turnovers that are related to their pace and their system, and turnovers that aren't, right? And there are different kinds of turnovers, and to what degree can you clean up the turnovers without changing the stuff that's working, right? If you say we're going to change our system to eliminate these turnovers, well, maybe your offense is not as good, even if you have fewer turnovers, because you're getting rid of the other stuff that's working. And so I do think when I watch the team, I think there are turnovers that are connected to the system in the sense of this emphasis on the drive and the cut and trying to make plays off of that you're trying to force passes and passing lanes, and maybe the good defenses are clogging it up in a way the bad aren't. I think I see some of that. And I think related to pace in the sense that, and this was maybe less than the Knicks game, but some other games, I've seen turnovers, particularly of Desmond Bane. I feel like I've seen turnovers where a player seems to be in such a hurry to be in a hurry that almost like you start moving, you forget the ball, or that kind of, there's such a focus on doing things quickly that you sort of get ahead of yourself and you have that. So I do think a lot of these turnovers are connected in different ways to the system and the pace, but the system and the pace are also yielding good results even with the turnovers. So I think it's tricky,
One of the interesting quotes I think that we got from Taylor Jenkins recently was when he was asked about the new offense. I think it was by maybe somebody from the Jazz television
Yeah,
group.
I think it was David Locke who was there.
And he said, we're still in data collecting mode, essentially, is what Taylor Jenkins said. We're more than halfway through the season. They've dealt with injuries all season. Is that an appropriate place, do you think, for the team to be right now at this stage?
I think, I don't know if he phrased it quite that way. Maybe he did. He does sometimes say that. I think the idea, first of all, the fact that, one of the things about that Knicks game is, to me, it very much looked like a team in playoff mode and a team in preseason mode in a way, meeting in a regular season game. Because at one point in the second quarter,
that even goes with the usage, the player usage, right?
And the second quarter, and then this is the second quarter. This game was an 8-point game at halftime. It wasn't over anywhere close. In the second quarter of that game, I think this was the second quarter, I'm pretty sure. I looked up and the Grizzlies had a lineup on the floor of Luke Kennard, Gigi Jackson, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson Jr. I am certain that lineup has never appeared on the floor together ever in an NBA game. And it felt like a team that was still experimenting with stuff. And the Knicks just we play our 7 guys and we play our starters heavy minutes, and this is what we do, and we're ready for the playoffs to start tonight. We know who we are, we know who's playing, we know when, we're done, let's go. And unfortunately for the Knicks, they got to wait a few months, and maybe their players wear down by the time they get to the second round of the playoffs.
That's the risk.
Right.
Yeah.
But right now, they're ready. You start the playoffs right now for the New York Knicks. Grizzlies aren't there, and part of that is maybe in your control, and I don't think you have to roll out that lineup in the second quarter of that game, which was weird. But also, Gigi Jackson just came back, and so if you're going to play him at all, which they should, you're going to play him in lineups that aren't used to playing together, right? At some point soon, I would hope Vince Williams is going to be back. He's played 3 games this season. Well, if you're going to play him, and they should, you're going to be playing lineups that aren't used to playing together. And, we'll see about Marcus Smart, who's feels like he's played 2 games ever, but it's 15 this season or whatever it is. And so to some degree, when you have had guys who've been out all season and you're starting to work them in, there's no choice but to do stuff that hasn't gotten a lot of reps. But I do think there's a degree to which the Grizzlies are in laboratory mode. And at some point you got to shift from laboratory mode to this is our science project and we're presenting it, right? And so how do you get from here to there in terms of the playoffs? I do think the fact that they just beat all the bad teams, maybe that doesn't mean anything in terms of playoff basketball, but it sure helps to give you some breathing room in terms of the standings, right? And give you time to figure stuff out.
Yeah. I have some breaking news, Chris. I have to interrupt with some Some breaking news. We just got
Fresh off the transom, I think they used to say.
Just got word from a team spokesperson. This is the exact wording. Vince Williams Jr. continues to progress, but is now considered week to week in his return from the grade 3 ankle sprain. Based on the prior timeline, the hope was for him to play by the end of this month, but unfortunately, sounds like Vince's return from the significant sprain will take a bit longer. So that's not good news.
It's not
good news for the Grizzlies.
Week to week can mean just about anything, as we have learned. They have. As I'm looking at the schedule now. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games between now and the All-Star break. So my wonder is, will he play before the All-Star break? February 12th. That's close to 2 weeks. I'm going to guess yes, he plays before the break, but it certainly does. It's not a certainty at this point.
Yeah, it feels like that was only an update because it was his.
It was time for an update.
Yeah, they said return to play, and he was coming up on the end of it, and so.
And I had asked back when the Grizzlies and I were both in Minnesota. I had asked, I think this is sort of referencing that. I had asked Taylor Jenkins then, do you expect Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams to play this month? This month being in January, and at the time he said yes. So I think that was their expectation at that time. And it's just, it's taking a little bit longer.
I think that the Grizzlies really need Vince.
They need at least one of Vince Williams or Marcus Smart.
The Marcus Smart thing still remains much more of a mystery than the Vince.
Oh, yeah. I am certain Vince Williams will play basketball for the Grizzlies this season. I don't know that about Marcus Smart, both from an injury standpoint and from the trade deadline is coming up standpoint. So, who knows?
Let's talk about the trade deadline a little bit, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
So the trade deadline is on February the 6th. It is, a week, a little bit more than a week
from tomorrow
today?
As we record.
I heard you on on Jeff Calkins' show this morning that you have a new favorite trade target.
Yeah, so this is, a month ago when I did a trade column, I just looked all over the league and thought about guys. And this is a guy I looked at and I thought, this team is not in selling mode. And so he's not going to be available, and I don't really see a one-to-one trade. And then I did our buddy Keith Parrish, I guess, on his pod yesterday morning, and he brought this player up as someone he liked. And I still I don't quite see how it would happen. And then later in the day, we got, who knows how real this is, but we got news that the Golden State Warriors are back in the mix for Jimmy Butler. And that's when the light bulb goes off for me. And so my fantasy fake trade, what I would like to see happen is for the Warriors to trade for Jimmy Butler, which means they have to trade Andrew Wiggins to match contracts. Miami doesn't seem to want long-term money coming back. And so that gives the Grizzlies an opportunity to be a third team in that deal and do a Marcus Smart plus John Conchar or maybe a Marcus Smart plus Luke Kennard deal to flip and get Andrew Wiggins out of that deal. I think Wiggins, much like the Cam Johnson, these kind of players, the veteran 3-and-D wing, big wing, is exactly sort of what they need. And I didn't think he was going to be available, but he would have to be available if there were Jimmy Butler trade. So that's my new pie in the sky. This is a scenario I could envision happening, and if everything breaks right, that's what I'm rooting for.
That would be, I think, a good trade for Memphis, and it would definitely give you some playoff experience.
In that made-up scenario, they would probably include a first-round pick in that too. But yeah,
the Jimmy Butler stuff is just not going to go away until something happens.
Yeah.
It's just at that point. But part of it has been driving me crazy, if I'm being honest. The idea that Jimmy Butler hates the city of Memphis and that's why he doesn't want to come to Memphis is just, I just refuse to believe that.
There's a portion of Memphis that's way too sensitive about stuff like that, and it's annoyed me for a long time. I say mostly native Memphian, White Station High School, represent. Memphis is too quick to get down on itself. and too quick to get mad when people from the outside may have said something bad about the city. Oh my God, light the pitchforks. This random person somewhere else may have insulted the city. We have to go get them. Drives me crazy. The reason Jimmy Butler doesn't want to come to Memphis pretty clearly is because he wants to go to a place that will put a big contract on the table for him the second he shows up.
It has nothing to do with the city of Memphis.
That does not appear to be the Grizzlies, right?
No, right. It's not to say that the Grizzlies couldn't, but it is to say that it is much more clear and obvious that if he were to go to Phoenix or somewhere like that, that's much more likely. Right. So I don't think that this is Jimmy Butler's vendetta against the Memphis Grizzlies.
And even if it was, who cares? Like, you know, people are allowed, like, you know, how many times do people in Memphis crack on, like, you know, other cities or whatever? It's okay. Let it go.
Yeah. Well, that has been frustrating to me. But I just don't think that's going to go away because, you know, I think if you're trying to read between the lines on all the reporting that's come out around this, like, I would guess that Miami theoretically likes what Memphis can offer about this. You know, for Jimmy Butler. That's why a
Grizzlies Jimmy Butler trade makes a lot of sense on paper, which is why when people write about it and they go through and you do your trade columns like I do and you go through and you're looking, does this make sense? Does that make sense? It's easy to find something that makes sense. The problem is twofold, and I'm not saying these problems are not surmountable, but they're real problems. One, Butler's kind of a pain to deal with, and there's too much risk to bring him in if he's not going to try to be the best version of himself. So he has to accept it in a positive way for any team that's bringing him in. And then two, he's got a $52 million player option for next season. And any team that is traded for Jimmy Butler, Grizzlies or anyone else, they have to A, feel like they're getting a good Jimmy Butler, and B, they have to have an accord about the future of that player option. I'm not even saying the accord has to be a specific thing. The Grizzlies and Jimmy Butler would have to be on the same page. I'm not saying what that page is. That's up to them. But they have to be on the same page about what's going to happen. Either it's like Jimmy Butler says, you know what? I'm coming here for some rental. We're going to go hard. I'm going to opt out and I'll go into free agency and we'll go our separate ways. I think that's fantasy land, but that's like one scenario, right? Another scenario could be the Grizzlies saying, you know what? If you'll be the best version of yourself you can be this season and next season, pick up the $52 million player option and we'll just pay it. We'll deal with that. If you're the best Jimmy Butler, we'll pay you $52 million and we'll be happy about it. If you're happy about it, and we can do that. I don't think that's likely, but that's a potential scenario. And the third scenario would be, you know what? Let's do what Phoenix would do. Maybe the number would be different, but we will give you a long-term contract after the season. It could be any of those things, but you're not trading for Jimmy Butler unless you're on the same page about what the path is. You're just not.
Yes, and it's very complex to reach that scenario. So, but again, it's just not gonna go away until something happens because that's. And I
don't think anything's gonna. My guess is that if it happens, it won't happen until the deadline, just because there's so much stuff in play. Like I mentioned the Warriors thing. I don't know how real that is. As reported, I think by Shams Charania yesterday, Warriors back in the mix. If the Warriors traded for Jimmy Butler, Dennis Schroeder is probably going to be part of that trade for contract matching. And he is not eligible to be traded in aggregation with other players until like the day before the deadline, right? There are other scenarios like that. My guess, who knows? It could happen while we're talking. My guess is nothing happens until the deadline day or the day before.
Do you think that we're going to get a less active trade market because this is going to hold things up?
Probably, although this De'Aaron Fox thing is like, you know, like that's a pretty big thing that's been plopped in the middle of all this, right? And it doesn't seem like there's any overlap between De'Aaron Fox teams and Jimmy Butler teams, but who knows? Like, it could be stuff out there people just don't see coming. So I don't know. I doubt. I think it's highly unlikely the Grizzlies would trade for Jimmy Butler, but I don't think it's a zero, right? Like, who knows? Maybe at the end of the day, nothing else works out and people come together and it's possible.
Does anybody on the Kings intrigue you if they decide to blow it up?
You know, is Kevin Huerter a buy low? He's had sort of a down season, but he's like a 6'7" shooter, you know, under contract. Keon Ellis, I kind of like.
Roll Tide.
What's that?
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, Keon Ellis. I don't really like DeRozan, I don't think, with this team. You know, I think they've got their shot creation for the most part in terms of high contract shot creation and John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson. You know, Sabonis, Jaren is kind of interesting, but given the contract, that wouldn't happen. So I don't really see anything there. That team's not deep anyway.
Yeah, there's not anything obvious out there. We've seen Zach Kleiman work on the margins before.
Right. Malik Monk is a guy, but like, who knows?
You know, we have seen him make trades on the margins, and maybe something we don't foresee is still on the way.
I will probably write a trade deadline column maybe on Monday, sometime before the deadline, unless something happens. But just the broad strokes of it. To me, like, you get the Jimmy Butler scenario, which we've talked about extensively. You got the Cam Johnson thing, which I think that's a real name that's out there. I think there are other complications of that I think make it unlikely. We've talked about that a little bit. I think we talked about that a lot on this podcast, actually, in the past. You've got this new scenario of if Butler gets traded somewhere else, because could that pop somebody else loose, the Andrew Wiggins thing I'm talking about. And then once you get past all of that, the thing I wonder about is do you get to the point of, are the Grizzlies at the point, and I have no evidence that they are, this is just me theorizing, do you get to the point of what I call the Marcus Smart escape hatch trade? Has it reached the point where you're just like, let's just move on and see what we can do to move on? I don't know that they're at that point. No one's suggested to me that they're at that point. But dude doesn't play basketball anymore. And so I wonder, you know?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Positionally, I think it's pretty clear what they could use. I mean, we're still talking about wings, right? And physical defenders.
Yeah, I mean, I still hold out hope. And now it's delayed even more, as we just learned, that the Vince Williams thing is going to really matter down the stretch. But he hasn't played in a long time, and he hasn't played meaningful basketball either, because all of his good games were on that team that was totally gone. Jalen Wells has been great, but Jalen Wells is still a rookie, you know? And so, yeah, I think that remains the big thing.
Last couple things. We've got All-Star Weekend coming up on Thursday before the Houston game. We will learn Jaren Jackson Jr.'s fate, if he will be an All-Star or not. Although, we have a new wrinkle today.
This is a low-stakes question, by the way. It would be nice for Jaren to make the All-Star team, and people will be mad if he doesn't. But there's not a whole lot at stake in Jaren Jackson making the All-Star team.
No, but as you said, it would be nice. Like, Jaren badly wants to make the All-Star team.
Right. It would be his second, by the way. He's been an All-Star.
Jaren does not hide that. He really does want to be an All-Star. And I would say Taylor Jenkins and company are lobbying hard for him to get in the game. So I think that hopefully that works and he ends up in the game from a coverage perspective, because we would have more to write about. I will have a lot coming up on Jaren Jackson Jr. in the near future. It's going to be close. But we have a new wrinkle, which is that Anthony Davis is going to be reevaluated in a week.
Oh, that's right. That came out today. I didn't think about that.
He feels like someone that's absolutely a lock to be on to be a reserve. You've got
open up an injury replacement slot.
Yeah,
right?
You've got 3 forward spots. You've got Victor Wembanyama is going to be one of them.
Yep.
Anthony Davis is going to be one of them.
Then
we will see if he can play.
Right.
And then Jalen Williams feels like it's going to happen because the Thunder deserve to have 2 All-Stars based on the way that they've played this season. So, and then you've got 2 wild card spots. And you've got Şengün, Jaren, and Sabonis. If we're just trying to look at this realistically, I think maybe Jalen Williams can get thrown in that grouping and make it a 4-person grouping.
And the NBA coaches of the Western Conference probably don't listen to this podcast, although they should. Jaren deserves to go in ahead of Anthony Davis.
I'm with you, but I just think that it is. I'm with you, but this is what we're facing, right? This is what the reality is of the situation, even if it's not what it should be. That's what it is. So it's going to be close. Like, I think it's going to be close, where it's going to be a tight decision. You know,
it's happened before. I want to say this happened with Marc Gasol one of the years. Marc Gasol made multiple All-Star teams with the Grizzlies and multiple All-NBA teams, but those did not sync up exactly. And I want to say there was a year he did not make the All-Star team, but made All-NBA later in the season. That could easily happen also here.
That would be better from a Grizzlies perspective, because you could go ahead and get that extension done with. But I think it's going to be close, and we'll see what happens. Maybe another factor here that maybe we just haven't discussed. If the Kings are blowing it up, then Jaren should go in over Sabonis too. Like, he's playing on a team that's still trying to be competitive.
I think he should anyway.
Like,
yeah.
That's
the ultimate.
Should give you another reason though. That's another reason. Like, oh, Kings are just gonna give it up. Like, all right, well, then maybe put the guy that's on the team that's trying to win a championship in the game. So we'll see what happens there. The last guard spot is interesting too, because we were talking about this last week when we picked all-star players.
Right.
Because I had a chance to look at it a little bit.
You're talking about the fourth guard spot.
Yeah, the last guard spot. So we had
the designated guard spot, not the wild card.
The starters are Curry and
Shea, SGA, and then Anthony Edwards.
Edwards will get one. So there's one more guard spot that needs to be taken. And I put Luka, I think last week, and then you put Kyrie. But it was like it wasn't really going to matter, and it feels like the Mavs are probably going to get a spot. We threw out the idea that maybe if you're going to include players that aren't playing a ton of the season, Ja could be considered.
Ja's not making a strong closing case here ahead of the selection.
No, but I think that, De'Aaron Fox would be also a player that could be in that.
Yeah, but he may have gotten a coach fired, and the coaches are voting on this.
Yeah,
I think that's going to work against him.
I think statistically, though, on a per game basis,
because coaches went on Mike Malone among them. Michael Malone. Good thing he's not listening. He'd be mad at me calling him Mike. Michael Malone went public with this, and so did I think one or two other coaches. They were mad about what happened to Mike Brown, and there's a lot of people drawing the line between De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown getting fired. I don't think that's. I think De'Aaron Fox is not going to make the All-Star team.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Zach Edey and Jalen Wells will play in the Rising Stars, though. We got that word yesterday. So
Reed Shepherd's on the G League team in the Rising Stars. That was kind of interesting.
Listen, Jaren makes the All-Star game, and all of a sudden, you have a chance to have 3 players playing on Sunday for the Memphis Grizzlies. Depending on what happens.
I forgot they changed these stupid rules.
I don't know how these teams are going to get set up.
God, these rules are just stupid.
But yeah, well, here's another scenario, because I'm pretty sure that there's a G League team playing in the Rising Stars event.
This is my point. Reed Shepherd's on the G League team. He's not on the rookie team. He's on the G League team.
For the Rising Stars event.
Yes.
Well, the winner of the Rising Stars event is going to play in the actual NBA.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
All-Star
stupid rules.
Mini tournament. And so Yuki is going to be a big voter for the G League Next Up game, which will also take place over that weekend. So you have a chance to get a lot of representation over these games for the Grizzlies, whether Jaren makes it or not. But
Luke Kennard did not get the invite to the dunk contest.
No, he did not. Neither did Jay Huff, although Jay Huff angled for it late. They put Mac McClung back in there. Come on, Mac. Give somebody else a chance.
I'm so bored with Mac McClung. Be an NBA player. I objected to this on the front end when he was winning these things. You're not an NBA player. Don't be in the dunk contest. I'm opposed to that. Period.
Yeah, I mean, also you just had so much potential with Jay. Like it's harder for bigs to win the dunk contest, obviously, because everything looks a little bit easier than maybe it actually is because of their height. But like, you could have had Jay put Yuki on his shoulders and like run and dunk, or like, I don't know. You could have had some serious like potential there for some collaboration. And it felt like an opportunity missed. But Jay said after shoot around last week, one of the days, he was like, it was Lang Whitaker, Grind City Media. So shout out to Lang. He went on Jessica Benson's show and was lobbying maybe for Jay Huff to get in because he does these crazy dunks.
Right.
And Jay was walking past in the hallway and he said, Jay, would you do the dunk contest? And Jay was like, if they invite me, yeah, I'm down. I'll do it. I guess he didn't really push that hard, but I would have rather seen Jay Huff. Jay Huff would have been so... I mean, can you just imagine Jay Huff from a body type perspective?
Yeah, no, it'd be great.
Contest? That would be great.
They have not announced the 3-point people, right?
I don't think so.
I mean, Kennard is like first or second in the league in 3-point percentage.
The thing about Luke, he's having a court dedication at his high school in Ohio.
So he might not do it.
I don't know if he would accept. Yeah, his high school, they built a new gym for his high school, and they are naming it Luke Kennard Court. So,
what about Jay Huff in the 3-point contest? He's above 40% from 3.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
What about Zach Edey in the three-point contest?
Hopefully plans are tentative.
Zach Edey's at 39% from three this season. He's going to be there anyway.
Can you imagine Zach Edey in the three-point contest? Man, it'd be fun.
It'd be great.
Do you think he could get them all off in time?
No, absolutely not.
No. Yeah, you're probably right. He's probably shooting 4 of the 5 racks, and then that's it. All right, well, that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. Hopefully we'll be talking about Jaren being selected to the All-Star game. And a Grizzlies win over the Rockets, maybe, finally. Who knows? But make sure you go check out all of the Daily Memphian's other stuff over at dailymemphian.com. Chris has a column up today. I'll have coverage from the game on Thursday. I've got a lot of stuff in the works, so I'd be looking over there early next week, or staying active on social media, unlike some of the Grizzlies who have given it up admirably. But that'll do it for us. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.